You never know what you're going to hear here today. But thank you, David. That was fabulous. I was kind of curious to see how many folks would show up today since Daniel Nahmod is over at Unity of Peace. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this spiritual community today. I was talking to somebody yesterday saying, every week it gets to be more and more challenging to find words that are beneficial and useful to say when the world looks like it's lost its mind. And as I've said in the meditation, it's like we've chosen to be here now because we're the ones that can do this. And so I appreciate every single one who is here and who has agreed, at least at some level, to participate in creating this new heaven and this new earth. Because there's not a lot of support for that outside of our world, except I see a note from Donna in the chat that Oprah had Pema Chodron on Super Soul Sunday this morning, and they were having this conversation. So I am delighted to see that more and more people are waking up to recognizing that we are, in fact, all in this together. And it is us changing our minds about how we see the world that makes space for something different to be born. So that's where we're going today. And, maybe that's exactly how it should be. And so in the description of the talk today, I put in a little quote, which comes from the Unity teaching, there is no spot where God is not. So I asked Reverend Nita if she knew the origin of that. And so she queried her sources and she said, the best I can figure is it looks like it came out of Christian Science. Because there was a Mary Baker Eddy prayer that included that idea. There is no spot where God is not. And both Unity and religious science have taken that on as part of their truth. Because it is. If there's only one, and it includes all, there is no spot where God is not. Even if it doesn't look like it. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that struggles with that second part. It doesn't look like it. And yet, it is true. And so our job, our task, our chore, our challenge, our opportunity is to be able to remember that and find that and see that and look for it. So how do we look and actually see and then respond appropriately when our world is so divided and so quite appropriately up in arms? And how do we wrap our minds around this idea of infinite inclusivity, one of the core teachings of New Thought? So I want to start in an odd place, which happens sometimes. It's a poem from Rumi. Many of you will remember having heard this before. And then I want to follow it with a short parable. The Rumi poem is called The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be cleaning you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from the beyond. Now the parable. This will be familiar to some of you as well. A young couple moves into a new neighborhood. The next morning, they're sitting at the dining room table or the kitchen table eating breakfast, and the young woman is looking out the window at her neighbor who's hanging washing on the clothesline outside. The young woman says, "That woman's laundry isn't very clean. She doesn't know how to wash correctly. Maybe she needs better soap." Her husband looks on and doesn't say anything. Every single day, the neighbor, hangs her laundry out. The young woman critically makes the same comments. Every single time. That woman doesn't know what she's doing. I wish someone would show her. I wish she would learn. A month later, the woman is surprised to see a nice, clean wash on the clothesline of her neighbor, and says to her husband, look, she's finally learned how to wash clothes correctly. I wonder who taught her." And the husband says, "I got up early this morning and cleaned our windows." And so it is with life. What we see when we watch others depends on the clarity of the window through which we look. So don't be too quick to judge others, especially if your perspective of life is clouded or colored by jealousy, negativity, unfulfilled desires, or anger. Judging a person does not define who they are. It defines who we are. That's credited to a fellow named Jonathan Kesterbaum. I've never known it to be attributed to anybody, but there you go. We know that the point of view we hold as we look determines what we see. If I see, as Rumi suggests, difficult or challenging times arriving on my doorstep as leading me to some new beneficial or increased awareness of some new delight somehow, then I am more likely to receive those ideas, those experiences kindly, positively, thinking about them from a forward point of view. And if I don't know my own windows are dirty, I will always see another person's action in a less supportive way. I'll come back to this thought in a minute. I don't know if you know, but Centers for Spiritual Living has a spiritually motivated social engagement committee. In the past couple weeks, they have drafted a news release on the necessity to end racism. It's being fairly widely shared around the world, and I'm going to read it to you now. And I will put a link to it in the Wednesday electronic newsletter so you can read it again, along with some other resources that I think you may find useful. So here it goes. Centers for Spiritual Living calls for racism in the U.S. to end. We grieve lives that ought not have been lost. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery are just the most recent in a list of countless unarmed African American and Black people who have been murdered for the color of their skin over the past 400 years in the U.S. Too many generations have suffered, and it has never been and is not now acceptable. We denounce racism in all its forms, the starkness of unapologetic intentional racism, the racism of silence in the face of injustice, the systemic racism inherent in our education, justice, income, and opportunity inequality, and the racism that lies hidden in our individual hearts and minds. We envision a world where personal responsibility joins with social conscience in every area of the political, corporate, academic, and social sectors. We value a community-wide climate of safety that arises from compassion, justice, mutual respect, and kindness. Therefore, we join with our founder, Dr. Ernest Holmes, who, echoing the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., said, "You and I should form the habit of taking definite time each day to contemplate and affirm peace with justice, for there is no peace possible without justice. Faith without works is dead. We should not only pray, but we should act, each contributing the best they have to the common purpose, and each willing to make any sacrifice necessary, for there can be no individual self-preservation without the preservation of all." This Ernest Holmes quote was taken from a small booklet of his called Spiritual Armament. They continue, "We call upon ourselves and the faith communities in the U.S. to take action that shows we have heard the cries of suffering and we own our own responsibility for it. Whether that action is prayer, donations to organizations that promote racial justice, rigorous self-education, or active engagement, let not this moment of history pass unattended. May the actions we take be steeped in peace and respect for the sacredness of each life, knowing that whatever we do individually and collectively must be divinely directed from a higher consciousness. When we apply our proven spiritual principles through rigorous practice and compassionate action, the desired results cannot fail to demonstrate. When we apply our proven spiritual principles through rigorous practices and compassionate action, the desired results cannot fail to demonstrate." Thursday night, when I was journaling before I went to bed, I couldn't wrap my mind around what felt like a disconnect for me between the protests of Black Lives Matter and the science of mind. I left it as a question in my journal overnight, and I really wanted an answer, so I basically demanded one. Friday morning, as I was reading the daily reading in 365 Days of Richer Living for the 11 people plus me who convened for our morning practice, I got my answer. Ernest Holmes and Raymond Charles Barker from Richer Living, page 157. "Jesus bid the waves be still, and they calmed at his word. I now look out on the troubles of my own experience and declare, peace be still." Jesus demonstrated to all that God's power is the only power. I am a center of this power, and it seeks my recognition and direction. My thought directs it, and my emotions motivate it. I am the only authority in my world. I may give this authority to others, to situations, or to conditions, but it is my free choice to do so. You may not have had a light bulb come on hearing those words, but I certainly did. Not really a light bulb, because it wasn't a new idea, but a very timely reminder about something that is so commonplace and so pervasive, it's easy to forget. That idea is simply that if I don't choose to direct my mind, then it and I will automatically follow the well-worn path of least resistance known as default thinking, or collective unconscious, or what everybody knows and believes but isn't actually really capital T true. And because I'm not driving my own bus, it's as true as I allow it to be, because it is done unto me and to you and to everyone in the whole world as we believe. Racism exists because it exists in your mind and my mind and everyone else's mind. And because it's in our mind, it shows up in our world. We have to root it out of our consciousnesses. It's a belief in separation. It's a belief that we're not one with all that is. So I'm really grateful this morning that at 9:59 and a half, Shelley texted me and said she couldn't get Zoom to work, so I had to do the meditation on the fly. And it was fabulous because I was able to work that idea even more fully into my consciousness and share that awareness with the folks that showed up for meditation this morning. So I'm grateful Zoom didn't work for Shelley, so I could have the experience of becoming more conscious myself. So from Dr. Ernest Holmes, from an older book of his called Love and Law, page 9, practically the whole human race is hypnotized because it thinks what somebody else told it to think. It thinks from its physical environment. The impersonal, eternal law receives the impression of my thought. And if I say everything is wrong, then it is wrong. In Christian Science, they call this the law of reflection. Like produces like attracts like draws like to itself, always. How many times have you heard that? So what am I getting at? We need to take appropriate actions in the world of form, but more important than even that, we need to change how we think about what's going on in the world, how we talk about it, how we pray about it, and how we perceive it. Dr. Karmen Smith, a Black religious science minister from Las Vegas, posted a talk on YouTube this past week. I'll also give you a link to her talk in the newsletter. It was very powerful. She said, "You can't be of the one love and hold hatred in your heart for another person." And then she explained what she meant. Finally, she said, she had enlarged a photograph of the face of the policeman who had his knee on George Floyd's neck. And she looked him in the eyes until she could shift her point of view about that man that she hated, until she could see him with the eyes of love and see him with the eyes of the divine. That's power. That's practice. That's living this teaching. And then she did the same thing with the photograph of the two guys that shot Ahmaud Arbery in February. She stared at their photographs until she could see them with the eyes of love. This is not a practice for the timid or the lazy. It takes a very strong faith and a very strong will and a very strong intention and a very profound understanding of the relationship between divine love and divine law. We are going against the grain of collectively held beliefs. And, if we're not paying attention, our physical life experience. It also requires a stronger desire for healing and wholeness than a desire for punishment and vengeance. We get to choose the world we experience. So I want to close with a piece of a story and then a quote from a teacher of mine. Sue Monk Kidd, the author who wrote Hidden Life of Bees, also wrote a book in 2015 called The Invention of Wings. It looks like a novel, and it's beautifully done. She portrayed life in Charleston, South Carolina in the early 1800s. The daughter, Sarah, was given a very unwelcome birthday present for her 11th birthday. She was given a slave whose name was Hetty, or Handful, a 10-year-old little girl who was supposed to be her maid when she grew up. Sarah didn't want a maid. She didn't want a slave. And yet that was the world she lived in. And so this book, Invention of Wings, is the story of the two of these little girls growing up. And as they grew up together, and it wasn't without its rocks and lumps and bumps and mess, but as they grew up together, as adults, they became, both of them, abolitionists. And they helped free slaves. And I don't know if they were alive. And at the end of the story, you realize that she's actually telling a true story. And I don't know if the two girls, when they were still alive for the 13th Amendment or not. I don't own my copy of this novel anymore. Phenomenal book. And the second thing I want to read in closing is a quote from Dr. Linda McNamar. It's from a book she wrote, out of print, called Alive with Spirit. Someone once said that when the winds of change blow, some people build walls and others build windmills. In other words, some people close down while others use the change to empower themselves. We might experience each of these reactions in ourselves when unexpected change enters our lives. What we imagine coming from the change may either enliven us or scare us. We can build walls to isolate us from what's coming, or we can use our imagination to learn and grow. Imagination is a vital part of our spiritual life, our unity with spirit, yet it can go to dark and lonely places if we don't direct it. In the original language of the Bible, wind, breath, and spirit are the same word. We could say that the breath and wind are metaphors for the tangible power of the invisible spirit. In times of change, we can ask ourselves, what can I learn from this? As spiritual beings, we know that all the answers are already within us. So a great spiritual practice is simply to take a very deep breath and turn our attention inward, listen for our own answers, and use our imagination to move successfully through the change. So we get to remember the truth of unity, oneness, wholeness, and love. We get to recreate them. We get to remember them and put them back together in today's world. We get to embody these and live them. It's not a one and done. We get to keep trying and keep having do-overs because we will screw up. I almost guarantee it. So give it your best shot and keep trying. Bless yourself and bless us all. Thank you. So I want to take a breath and another one and another one and another one. And remember, go back to where we started at the beginning of today with that idea of wholeness and oneness and allness. And remember that each one of us lives as that to the fullest extent we can imagine, lives as that to the best we can pull off at any moment. And even when we forget, even when we get caught in the drama and the chaos of the world in front of our eyes, we know at the core of our being is this oneness, this life, this love, this power, this truth of infinite inclusivity. There is only one of us. And it shows up with so many different bodies. So I breathe into my experience of that oneness. And I celebrate every single individual who attempts again and again and again and again to embody that oneness, to live in that space of wholeness, to be that light and that life and that presence of love in the world, knowing each and all as divinely guided and gifted. I bless this day. I bless this opportunity to be alive in this moment. And I celebrate life. It is good and very good, and I let it be. And so it is.